The greatest thing from Quebec since Celine Dion and GSP.
A pair of siblings.
A couple of stellar young men.
Two brothers.
These two young men. Two siblings. The hard-hitting pair represent Canada.
Welcome to Thinking Bros. My name is Chris.
And I'm Alex.
We're your favorite corner store philosophers trying to figure out life one conundrum at a time. Today we're going to be discussing Plato's Meno, which is a dialogue about what virtue is and whether it can be taught, or is it innate, or what's the third option? I forgot.
Something else. It's literally something else.
Or something else. So yeah, in a typical Platonic fashion, Socrates is just denying what everyone's saying. And I guess everyone's intuitive conclusion about whether virtue can be taught. First of all, you wouldn't ask the first question about, oh, can we even determine if it can be taught if we know what it is? If we don't know what it is? That's the first thing kind of Socrates makes you question.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I would just be comfortable answering like, yeah, it can be taught. But then if you ask me what it is, then things get harder. But then everyone's conclusion would be, yes, it can. Otherwise, how would people come to be virtuous? But yeah, the answer in this dialogue is definitely no.
Indeed.
Yeah.
From Socrates.
Yeah.
It just reminded me how much I like Socrates. He's a funny guy.
He is.
It seems like everything he's saying, so just some key passages seem so much like sarcasm, but at the same time, if he's fully himself, if he's 100% honest, like it's so consistent with the character of Socrates. Just love it.
Yeah, I think that Plato, the reason this all survived, right? Whoever actual historical Socrates was, Plato's just a good writer as well.
Very good.
So obviously, yes, the subtle sarcasm, it's all within it.
And Socrates gets such compliant, like, people to discuss with. At least one of the people in the story.
No, I know, but still, it still feels like everyone's just a tool for him to pursue his questioning. The role of a lot of these characters is not like just as we're gonna get to the passage of the slave, but just as the slave answers exactly what Socrates thinks he will, other people do as well, just so he can demonstrate that's not true.
Well, not necessarily what he thinks they will, because at some point the slave says, "I don't know," and he has to question further. I think they're just answering honestly.
Yeah, but that's part of the plan, right? In the sense that he now realized. But when he summarizes what happened with the slave, he says, well, at first he thought he knew, then he realized he didn't know, which is part of recollection, right? So, okay, I don't know if you have the structure down, but I'm pretty sure the first part is, they get right into the discussion. And the first part is kind of, what is virtue?
Right. So Meno asks Socrates first, how is virtue transmitted? How is virtue acquired? Is it taught, or is it innate, or something else? And Socrates asks him for a definition of virtue before doing all of that. And Meno sort of tries and fails to describe what virtue is. And at the beginning, as per usual with Socratic dialogues, he's confident he had a good teacher, and Socrates respects that teacher, and he's very confident in his definition, but he ends up just describing instances of virtue, right? So first he just says virtue is an action done with justice, temperance, and generosity, or whatever.
I thought that's what Socrates said, because really what Meno said, and his teacher was gorgeous, right? Gorgeous, whatever. He said that it was being a good statesman and kind of
that's
leading
right.
your affairs well.
That's right, but that's where Socrates is questioning ends up after that. So there's that definition at the beginning, and then Socrates is like, okay, but what if you lead it with injustice? Is that a virtue? And he's like, no. And what about a slave? Is a slave's virtue leading his master? No. And then I guess it gets decomposed, and even for a leader, leading the state or leading the family, whatever, is not a virtue in itself, unless it's done with these sub virtues.
That like either temperance or justice and moderation or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, they name a couple. Yeah.
Yes, and then it shifts to being virtuous is desiring good things and being able to get them, I think.
Yeah. A couple things that are weird in the text, I think. Like, desiring is... Socrates at some point says, and by desiring, do you mean acquiring these things? Like, literally. I think that's exactly what he says. I mean, desiring for me is wanting and striving to acquire, not acquiring these things.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, there are some weird things, but it feels like it's maybe one of those lost in translation parts.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first part, and I don't know how we end up here, but the next thing is that Socrates tries to give examples of definitions to Meno, to guide Meno, to give him a definition of virtue, right? So the problem of Meno's explanation, or at least where it ends up when further questioned by Socrates, is that Meno gives him examples of virtues, like temperance and justice or whatever. And Socrates goes with a bee analogy and says, if I ask you to define a bee and you just show me all these different sort of individual bees, that's not going to be a definition of a bee. You still think that there's something linking all of the bees together that define them as a bee. And Meno agrees, as he tends to do in the text. And I guess Socrates goes into a definition of a shape to show what a definition is to Meno.
Yeah.
And the definition of the shape is the next very weird thing, I think.
Yeah,
Like
is roundness
leading to color or something?
Yeah. Well, that goes a little bit after, but he says, when I say a circle, is it shape or is it a shape?
Yeah, that made sense to me, though.
It makes
sense.
It's
virtue or a virtue, yeah.
Yeah, but there is a weird thing where Socrates literally says,
like, I
the
just don't
definition
understand.
of a color is that shape leads to color or precedes color.
I don't think that's it. I think it's in the definition of shape that we'll look for the passage, because I think it's...
Yeah, I think it's on the bottom right. Yeah. But also, I think maybe he goes more in depth in another dialogue. I forgot. But when I had my class on Plato, Socrates did argue that... I think it is another dialogue. Because it might be the Republic. They go in depth on how virtue is a swarm of bees.
Oh.
In the sense that, well, it's... Yeah. I think the example is brought up again, but the ultimate thing is it's somehow pictured circularly, which is really interesting how he gets geometry into this whole thing, and it all works out. First of all, later on, for virtue, he uses the method a geometer would use to determine something, aka he has a hypothesis at the beginning, which is kind of the final answer, and then tries to contradict it or whatever, right? Whatever logical method he was using.
Mm-hmm.
Then he displays his point about recollection, which we'll get into, with the slave fully geometrically. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, so the definition of the shape is, see whether you will accept that it is this. Let us say that shape is that which alone of existing things always follows color.
But But didn't he say earlier just that it was what enclosed?
Later, yeah.
Oh, okay, that's later.
From this you may understand what I mean by shape, for I say this of every shape, that a shape is that which limits a solid. In a word, a shape is the limit of a solid.
Yeah, so that part makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we can decipher it. If we both didn't understand it,
Yeah.
I don't have any leads.
I mean, if we don't know it, it's not worth looking for because we don't know it.
Exactly. That's the point of the dialogue. So, but yeah, I was gonna say that I'm pretty sure in another dialogue he goes more in depth in proving that I don't know how people really picture these different virtues and how they're part of the whole. But for him, it's this kind of circle or a sphere, and all of them are maybe sides of that sphere.
Okay.
But they're not distinct in any way.
I see.
And I think that I think courage is somehow a little bit different in a way, because he really homogenizes all the other virtues one by one by describing how they're part of this good. And I think that's what it was. The point was the form of good or the form of knowledge is this sphere
of virtue.
And yeah, whichever angle you look at it from, it might come out as temperance, it might come out as justice, but it was all the same.
Okay.
So yeah, this is the point of the dialogue.
I love how I don't know, it feels like Socrates is in high demand. Like at the end of this text, he's just like, oh, he talked the whole way through, right? It was just him talking for an hour and a half. And he's like, oh, thank you so much for us working this out together. I must go now. Maybe next time we'll see what virtue is.
Yeah, definitely an interesting life. Yeah.
So next he defines color we don't need to get into the exact terms. I think it's a pretty good definition of colors. Like he agrees with what physiologists of the time, see as what we would describe, photons coming into the eye, whatever it was called at the time. He says, out in the world, things coming in through the sense organs, and that's what we perceive as color. Like a very stepwise definition where before he defines color, he agrees with Meno, saying, oh, do you think this is what it is? The sense organ, and then the medium that enters the eye, whatever. So like he goes every step of the way to ensure that they're both on the same page.
It just reminds me of how Chris D'Elia once met Eminem, and while they were talking, Eminem just kind of randomly started rapping. Like he said the end of a sentence, and then he started the other one and rhymed the whole way through until the end of the conversation for no reason. Well, for
because he's Eminem.
Because he's Eminem. And to anyone, it might seem surprising, but we've talked about mental representations and how comfortable people who spend thousands of hours on things are with anything they put their mind to. And it just fascinates me because I used to do this a lot when I, used to overthink when I was younger. I used to have these predetermined answers to a lot of philosophical questions. And when someone asked me a novel one that kind of correlated with other things, I just came up with an answer or a thought experiment. I used to be a thought experiment guy on the spot, which I then realized I was so satisfied with, and I asked myself, how am I doing this? But it was just, constructing these mental representations where you're not that far off from anything else in philosophy when you put your time into it. Like some of the foundations and buildings you've built in your mind are always like one block away from the other things. And so you come up with these novel thought experiments and thoughts that are actually satisfactory to your standards. And you just feel like it's magic, but you've worked on this. So these things, like, do you think necessarily, probably yes, but do you think necessarily Socrates has already once thought of how to define color in the most philosophical stepwise manner? I mean, probably because, being a physicist was part of being an intellectual of the time, because, the knowledge was limited. So you just kind of figure stuff out without seeing the atoms. You just figure out, okay, what is light? What is whatever?
I think he definitely, in some of his conversations, had thought of things beforehand.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it is also just made up in the moment.
Yeah, because, you look at this book, which is, as large as the Bible, probably, I don't know.
Probably, yeah.
And, at least one of the things that randomly came up in his conversations, he wasn't ready for.
Yeah.
In a sense that, he has never thought about that exact question.
But
But the answers are always like, oh, let me backtrack 10 steps and take you through how I'm going to get to the perfect conclusion. It's always that.
Yeah, but I think it's like when you get someone smart enough that's very solid in his worldview, like as you are, like you have this idea of how the world works, and you want to like you make everything fit into it. And Socrates was like that, right? It's I know nothing. Like I don't know about the other people know something that they can teach me, but like the basic thing is I know nothing. If I question myself far enough, I can't answer these questions. And like I think just with experience talking to people, experience argumenting and everything, that was his whole life, right? And being ingrained in this worldview, he just starts to head that way with the conversation, starts to head towards let's start asking questions. And he's like he knows his stuff so well that he ends up like it ends up well for him all the time.
Yeah, and this is interesting. I've probably forgot about this, but in this dialogue, he actually claims that if there is one thing he knows, it's this. And we've talked about this in our episode on belief, right? Or true belief. About the distinction between knowledge and true opinion. But anyway, this is more relevant to the end of the conversation, but what he claims here that he knows, and it's one of the few, like, okay, anyway.
Or only?
No, not, it's one of the only, but he says there are more things, but there's one thing I certainly know, and it's that knowledge differs from true opinion.
Which is a very weird thing to like take a specific thing to take
it's a highly
stance
theoretical,
on.
yeah. And yeah, it's
very relevant to Socrates, I think. Because his claim is that he has no knowledge.
Yeah.
He probably has true opinions.
Yeah. And the big distinction there, I don't know, we're probably going to get into it, but the big distinction between the two, he says, is that true opinion is fleeting. And when it was brought up and the question was asked, okay, what's the distinction between the two? I was going to say the beauty of knowledge is that it's replicable. Because when you have the right justification, you can use the method of the justification to come to new knowledge. But he used the word fleeting. I don't know if we mean the same thing in that way. Where I'm spoiling the end right now, but he says that the people who are virtuous, should I? Yeah,
no. I mean, I think there's a couple, like the whole. Can you search for the unknown? We should get through that.
Okay.
And
yeah, like we're definitely gonna get where I'm.
Let's put a pin in it.
Let's. Okay.
And so they don't know what virtue is, and Meno gives it. What does Socrates call it? The argumenter's argument or something.
I don't know.
It's like anyway, Meno argues that it's no use looking for a definition of virtue. It's no use for looking for stuff we don't know, because if we don't know it, then we don't know what we're looking for, and we obviously can't find it because we don't know what we're looking for. And if we already know it, then we already know it. Then why look for it?
And it's awesome because Socrates doesn't deny that at the beginning. He lets Meno believe that for a whole, like a part of the dialogue. And lets Meno understand throughout their conversation that that's kind of a paradox, and we can't. Well, why look for anything ever?
Yeah.
And it's clear from the beginning, but it's funny that Socrates accepts it because it bugs you throughout the whole thing, I think.
It is a weird argument for Socrates, I think, though. Isn't it weird that he just like he gives this explanation of why it's not true, which has a lot of emphasis on practicality.
Yeah.
He like, I feel like 50% of why he thinks it's true is because it
Of the
motivates
logic.
us. It motivates us to look for things.
I see what you're saying, yeah, because most of his definitions are logical.
Yeah.
Like, I'll at least spoil this, right? If he says that if virtue were to be taught,
Teachable or taught?
teachable, then there would be teachers of virtue and students of virtue. But because there are no such things, it can't be.
Which I don't like, by the way.
Exactly. Like, you don't
Yeah.
like it because it's just highly on the logical plane. And yeah, I understand, like, it goes into the practical in the sense that, yeah, you're looking for the teachers, like, show me the teachers. But it is a very logical thing where, okay, if shoemaking is teachable, then there are shoemakers who can teach it and students of shoemakers, correct? Yeah. Okay, who are the students and teachers of virtue?
Yeah,
Well,
but
you can't say sophists.
yeah, but I think the argument doesn't work because, like, at least one direction of the argument doesn't work. He says if it was teachable, there would be teachers and students. But, like, what if I came back there to Socrates and I said, like, modern physics, electromagnetism is a thing that is teachable. But there are no teachers back there of electromagnetism. Like, the fact that there are no teachers doesn't mean the thing isn't teachable.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
That direction of the
But that's one of the things where it's a little bit unfair because he doesn't know it exists. So it's in that way, the part where he says, oh, why even look for it if I don't even know what to look for? Because once you make him aware of electromagnetism and even define the word to him, he can be like, well, okay, now I'm sure, like, at least I know more than absolutely everyone in my timeline about what it is, so I can be a teacher of it. Like, you've made him aware that it exists. You understand what I'm saying? Like, you're using something that doesn't exist for that time. But virtue has been thought about for hundreds of years already then. I understand, like, the temporality.
I see what
of
you're
it,
saying.
but
Yeah, but it is weird for me still.
I get it. Maybe we'll get to it, but do
So-
we get to the first?
Yeah. So Meno's claim is what we said. So what you don't know is not worth looking for because you won't know when you find it, and what you do know is not worth looking for because you know it. And so what's the point of looking for virtue? And Socrates basically replies by saying that he's heard religious people say this, and he agrees with it, that the soul is immortal. Is this where that stems from, or I guess is it consistent throughout and it pops up in a couple of things? Like the immortality of the soul and remembering is a big thing that's taught about Socrates. I don't know if this is the source
Probably.
material.
Yeah, like, as you can see, he believes in a lot of what the poets say and what Homer says, and
He seems very like I understand he doubts everything, but to me it seems really unfair to prosecute him because he's really a man of God.
see,
Or God.
yeah,
Whatever they had
I
back
think
then.
I think he's so smart that he knows the business, like he understands the game, and the game is to know what the religious books say better than anyone and still doubt them.
Right. And know
because-
how to convince people who believe them with them.
Yeah, because he's the god of contradictions, and in knowing all these religious texts, he can point out these contradictions where, one thing says gods are this, the other thing says gods are this. If the thing itself is inconsistent, well, what's the point of the religious text? And I think it's a lot of like highly intellectual mockery where he says, "Oh, you want to talk to me about gods? Let's talk about gods because I know about this stuff."
Yeah. Yeah.
It's powerful. It's powerful.
So what Socrates says is that he's heard these people say,
And
it's
because
always-
they said it,
it's always like, oh, Gorgias, I respect Gorgias so much. So tell me what he said. I want to know his definition of virtue. He
Exactly.
knows. Yeah. So what these religious people say is that the soul is immortal. And so the argument about it not being worth looking for things that you don't know doesn't work because the soul is immortal and it's been around for an eternity of time and knows everything. So what we perceive as learning is simply recalling, is simply your soul remembering what it once knew as knowledge, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's the argument. And he demonstrates this, I don't know how much detail we want to go with, just a random slave in Meno's house. He helps him arrive at a definition, at an answer to a geometric question.
Yeah, so what's the
Length of the side.
Yeah, of a square that is double the surface area of another square.
Yeah, of a square with side 2, I think. Which they don't arrive at an answer, by the way, in numbers.
Yeah, not in numbers, but you can find it geometrically.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think it was really interesting because also you can see how good Socrates is at perspective. Because at some point, so he starts to solve by drawing a square with a plus inside it, right? So it creates 4 other squares that are 1/4 of its surface area. And I'm just going to make this small point about it. You'll see how much you want to talk about this. But so he asks the slave, okay, so he doesn't say surface area, but he says how big is the square or whatever it is, right?
A square of 4 or something.
Yeah. So how large is it? And he says one of these sides is 2
2 feet. Yeah.
So 2 feet in length. So of course the small squares, their sides are 1 feet in length. 1 foot. So he says, let me put it like this: if I were to remove half of the square, it would be 2 feet 1 time or something like that.
Yeah.
In kind of those terms.
Yes. Yeah.
So therefore it's double. So if I add back the half of it, it would be 2 feet 2 times. And it's like, to a slave who's never been taught math, he kind of teaches him the principle of multiplication in a intuitive manner.
Yeah, but he also knows what 2 times 2 and 4 times 4 is, which is
Yeah, well, I think
impressive.
I think because he, in a way, just gives them the mental representation that happens in the head of mathematicians in front of his eyes by drawing the square on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
So if he can see that, okay, 2 1 times is 2 because I can see these 2 squares, then 2 times 2 must be 4 because I can see 4 squares. Then 3 times 3, yeah, I don't know how he does that, but so yeah. It's just really cool because if you were to teach someone math for the first time, right? Like you teaching a child, I feel like that would be the way to do it. And Socrates was prepared for it. This is so interesting about, theory of mind and perspective taking in talking to other people, because he is at such an advanced level. This is why a lot of experts in fields are lousy teachers, because they can't take the perspective. They can't remember what it means to explain to someone what a hydrogen atom is, right? And what it looks like on a microscopic scale. They're on the, calculate high, abstract math things, right? So anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. So it's his questions are very leading. I don't know how much if I was in Meno's shoes, how much I would agree with Socrates that the slave just remembered everything.
Yeah, I was right.
Because Socrates just every step of the way asks him if the correct answer is correct. He's like, so would this be half of it? And then the slave is like, yes.
Yeah, but then okay, so just to take you through the conversation, so he he makes him figure out that the surface area is 4 of the square that I said, and then he asks, okay, so what would be the length of the side of a square that is double
Twice,
that surface area, so 8. And then the slave says, well, obviously it would be 4 the length of the side of the square. Then he makes him figure out that's 16, and then he makes him figure out that...
But just imagine that part, like the slave says, oh, the side of the square would be 4, and then Socrates turns to Meno. You see how stupid he is? Like,
yeah, that's pretty much what he said. No, it's funny to talk about someone at the third person, because he narrates what's happening to Meno while questioning the slave about the square.
yeah.
It's really disrespectful, but he's also, I don't know, a slave. So yeah, then he makes him figure out, like, okay, the length of the side must then be between 2 and 4, because their surface areas are respectively 4 and 16, and we want 8, so it would be between the two. So what would it be? And then he says 3.
Yeah.
And then he says, well, what is 3? That's surface area 9. Okay, so how do you figure out? Again, he doesn't come to a number. He figures it out geometrically, that if you... I guess I can give the whole thing, because it's just I'm at that point now. So he says, if you can see the square in your mind with the plus in the middle, so if you slash each small square in half and create a, what do you call it?
2 triangles.
Sure, 2 triangles, but what's the shape?
It's a square in the middle, just tilted.
Yeah, but...
Diamond, trapezoid.
Yeah, trapezoid. Anyway, yeah, but a tilted square, by cutting all the small squares in half, if the surface area of the big one is 4, then what?
Or we take the one that's 16.
Yeah, we take the one that's 16. So 4 is the length of the side.
Yeah.
You cut each square in half.
Diagonally.
It creates a small, diagonally. It creates a small square in the middle, the surface area of which is 8.
Because half of the triangles are inside and half of the triangles are outside of that square.
Yeah. And essentially Socrates' point is that, here's the thing. The questions were good, where he says, okay, what do you think the surface area is? Okay, you can clearly see that it's not. What would be in the middle? So yeah, these are leading questions. And they get disputed in court.
He also draws.
That's my big point, right?
Yeah.
Like, if Socrates were to argue, okay, I absolutely didn't give him anything, and he recollected it all through my guidance, drawing those squares is the equivalent of me saying what I said in the podcast about those squares. So it's a lot of information in that sense.
Yeah.
Now,
but I mean,
if there were a process of recollection, it's not like you couldn't lead it. You couldn't say to the slave, okay, give me an answer. Okay, to what question? Then you ask the question, and then he's like, okay, what is that? So it's still plausible. Now, I understand your doubts about it, but the interesting thing is there is a way to make people arrive at an answer by themselves, and it's by knowing the logical process behind it. And I know that intuitively that rings a bell for you, because you've done tutoring as well in high school. And pretty much everything you do when you teach someone is ask questions, isn't it? You never give them the answer. So, no, but...
Yeah. To teach them well, to make them think.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. I just think that I don't know if the slave example has the effect that they thought it had, like Socrates and Meno thought it had in the moment. I think the way to explain it to someone, you don't need to go that deep. I think it's pretty intuitive to say that you can learn things that you don't know. Like, you don't need to go into the recalling thing. But I guess to someone ingrained in the in the idea that you can't learn something that you don't know, you need to get at it in some way.
Yeah, I also think it's that conversation is a microcosm of the entire conversation, in the sense that he makes Meno recall, and makes them go through, as I said earlier, he makes the slave go through, okay, I definitely know what the double surface area is. It's just double the side. So overconfidence without actual knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Then he makes him go through doubt. Then he makes him go through recollection, and recollection leads to knowledge. Pretty sure is what it is. And that's pretty much where we're at with Meno, the same path he takes. So I think just as a literary device, it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I noted this down. What, like, if you really think about it, what do you think about learning and about this argument that you can't learn something that you don't know? Like, in what way, what happens when we learn something?
I think...
Are there, because my intuition led me to, I didn't think about this much, honestly, but I think there's some very low-level things that appear very, very intuitive and that we agree on, and then we just build a bunch of these together to, like, go through this logical process of learning.
Yeah, I do think... I've said this before, maybe 20 episodes ago, how I picture the entirety of knowledge as a system of neurons with, each central neuron being a piece of information or a concept, and a lot of links coming out of that neuron, and those links being activated is a link between two pieces of information. A neuron being activated is you knowing that part of the concept. And I do think for someone who's, in my theory, right, neurons are largely activated within a certain area like physics, it's much easier to figure something new out because you already have 10 neurons that are linked to that inactivated neuron. So you just kind of, when it clicks, it really clicks because you've activated 10 links.
Yeah.
See,
but I think, how did we describe it? Like a new point of knowledge is added to the neuron map, and there's links to be made from, obviously, from a lot of things because it didn't come out of nowhere. Something like that.
Exactly. And as you said, I do think that, especially this Socrates does kind of demonstrate, with just a few neurons activated, like in the slave example, if you know the logical process to guide people through it, I'm sure that to get to abstract mathematics, you would start by understanding the 1 + 1 = 2, and then probably unlearning it at some other point in the way. But right. So in the same way, Socrates knows how to activate these links and make these new neurons pop. And instead of giving the piece of information that activates the neuron, he's good at really, harvesting these links from very little information. And it's the same thing about, teaching kids, right? Primary school education, even high school education, is so little within the human realm of knowledge. And yet, once those things are there, you can build it up to anything if you know the path towards it. What was your initial question?
Yeah.
How does knowledge work? How does a new point create? I think we all have the basic knowledge to know pretty much anything. That's the thing.
Yeah, I think it's very weird that this was such a stumping question back then, I think it comes intuitively that it's just, there's some things at the bottom level that we assume, I guess, that we can't know for sure, or some things that we have no reason not to believe, and then everything is just built on top of that. So these two elements create this neuron. Okay, this is a piece of knowledge I now have and take for granted. And then this combine, and then you get more knowledge.
Yeah, I think it's if you look at something like the structure of an atom, I think if you haven't been in the world and understood, for example, what a circle is by seeing a circle, or what an orbit is, for example, by taking a ball and attaching it to a string and making it rotate around your hand, you have to have these extremely basic pieces of experience to understand when I talk to you about the structure of a neuron, of an atom. And it's the same thing, right? If you go back then, the structure of an atom was unknown. But could you explain it to Socrates? Of course, because he has the basic life experience to understand it, right? So yes, absolutely. I think there are always ways to get into new pieces of absolutely undiscovered knowledge. And we all, well, I don't know if we all, you have to have experienced the world in very basic ways to even be capable of getting there. Yeah.
Yeah. I think everyone experiences the world in those basic ways. And by everyone, I mean probably everyone
except Mary, the color scientist.
Rest in peace, man.
Yeah. Anyway, so, okay, the point is now proven, right? We've talked about a little bit about virtue and what it's not. We've talked about recollection. Now we can go through the small, theories. And these are pretty straightforward answers, although they take 2 to 4 pages. The first theory is you're born with virtue. And really, that kind of rings true. Well, his way of denying that kind of rings true. But then also, his final conclusion is also that we are kind of born with virtue, in a way. So maybe we'll get back to that. But he says that, okay, if that were the case, people would get good at identifying the babies that are born with virtue and preserve them and, protect them from society in some castle and then make them leaders.
In the Acropolis, of course.
In the Acropolis. And then make them leaders because that would be profitable. But since that system hasn't been set up, we can't be born with virtue. Again, it's an experience-based answer. It's a very practical answer because in practice, indeed, if people were born with virtue, people would notice and identify these babies and preserve them to be good leaders. But that's not the case.
Yeah, but I mean, a counter argument is that we're not good enough to notice.
Yeah, no one's developed the method to notice, but yeah. And again, maybe that's out of character for Socrates because these are very practical answers.
And yeah, okay.
Yeah, it is out of character, I feel like. Because when he gets into his logical stuff, you can't really say much. But you know what? Actually, his logical stuff is also pretty experience-based in the sense that these metaphors and thought experiments, they're very...
idioms. Giddy up.
Exactly. But for example, didn't we read some other thing or The Republic? And he was saying the point of a doctor is to, heal the body, right? Stuff like that. So yeah. It's undeniable experience-based block by block argument.
I think Socrates is very good at, like, if I had him in front of me, he would convince me. But it's not necessarily. Sure. It's not necessarily. I sort of thought of him as a sophist at some points. Didn't you? Like, sophists are supposed to be people that are good at argumenting and convincing you, but don't necessarily hold the truth, right?
Yeah.
And like this logical step in particular, where he says that there are no teachers of it and no students, therefore it is not teachable. I didn't like. I don't like. Just logically, that doesn't work, right? There's a world where something that is teachable has no teachers.
Maybe it's the cultural context. Maybe it's the fact that virtue is so important because these sophists who pretend they're teaching virtue are actually making money, just walking city to city, giving speeches, convincing people they know how to make them better. Socrates is, an extremely popular figure, getting paid and subsidized by rich people just so he attends their parties. Maybe the pursuit of virtue was actually much more important than it is now, and
so that if it was teachable, they would have discovered.
Yeah, they would value it so much as a society that teachers must exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another point for this is when Meno says, "Well, no, there are, right? And then Socrates says, okay, name me one, because I've been walking around searching for these people, and the sophists aren't doing the job. Parmenides who did he diss?
Names a lot of people.
Yeah, he name drops and says that all these people he's explored aren't competent at it, and he hasn't found one that pretends to teach virtue and does it well. Therefore, it mustn't be teachable. It's interesting. But then, of course, he himself says, "Oh, but I'm not one of these people either. You and I are incompetent, Meno, so maybe these people can teach us something, but I haven't found them."
Yeah, and the way he... Right, so the inborn argument, he says that we would, see them when they're young, select them, protect them in the Acropolis, and make them leaders later. It would be identifiable. And to argue against it being teachable, he says that he, as Socrates does, he goes into like probably a 1-page thing where he says, who would be the teachers? The teachers would be those that are best at it, right? And who are the best at it? And blah, 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 blah. Bunch of things. And then he says, okay, let's take examples. So this guy, would you say he's like the image of virtue? Yes, like the best of men, whatever. And then he says, well, he has a son, and his son is sort of a bum, or like not known for being virtuous.
Would it not be in his interest to, transmit that virtue to his son?
Exactly. For like 2 or 3 characters, he's like, yeah, he taught his son how to be a good horseman, and he has these moves. He's the best wrestler in the world, but he's not virtuous. And then, well, at this point, there's a new character in the story, which...
Okay, but by the way, the point of saying that he's taught him, for example, horse riding is that to show that his son isn't disabled in any way and he can learn, but why can't he learn virtue?
Right. And the point is, it's not teachable. And at this point, there's a new person in the story who's one of the accusers in Socrates' trial later.
Oh, well.
And he says, like, oh, be careful what you say, because Socrates is insulting people that are high up, always causing trouble. Yeah, and from there, he starts to present what he thinks virtue is.
Yeah, I think there's a parallel to be made here with the modern day interest in geniuses. Genii, because, look, we can't identify them necessarily when they're born. The son of a genius isn't necessarily a genius. So how are these things made? Well, Anders Ericsson seems to have the answer. And we can identify them young by, their increased interest and their intrinsic motivation to pursue these things, but it's still not a perfect system, and you can't necessarily consistently create them.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're just like, oh, let me make the best physicist, well, if you dump physics on him, he's probably just gonna rebel by the age of 8. Anyway, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tangent. So he gets into what virtue is.
Yes. And as we said earlier, this is where the distinction between true opinion and knowledge is important. And so first he starts saying to Meno that sort of true opinion, and knowledge are as useful to a person. A person with a true opinion will act in some way, and that is going to be the right way. And a person with knowledge is going to act in some way, and that's going to be the right way. Then the difference between true opinion and knowledge is that knowledge is tied down. Now, yeah, like what exactly does that mean?
I think if we go back to my metaphor, it's that you activated a neuron in a very straightforward manner, in the sense that you have the framework of how to gradually activate the link from one neuron to the other. And what I mean by that is, again, for me, it's replicability. So a smart person, a person who's really good, so what we would call intelligence in any given field. So for example, an understanding of horse races and horse social dynamics and stuff like that. That person would be able to replicate a good bet on a horse. Whereas a time traveler who comes over here with a year in advance of
Results.
the results of the horse races, he would have true opinions for a year and make all the same predictions that a person who's intelligent is. But as soon as that, booklet expires, he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know how to come up with these things, right? He only knows the facts. Whereas the person with the intelligence can deduce the facts. And that's where knowledge is more valuable, although the person with the true opinion and knowledge have access to the same facts and act in a similar manner. This is why I see it as tied down, because if you really translate it into human experience, why would knowledge be more interesting than true opinion? And that's the thing, because the person with knowledge can come up with them and come up with them in a consistent manner, and in a manner where they know it's the right manner. Right.
But,
so
yeah. Yeah, so that's, I mean, I guess we're saying it basically, that's where Socrates ends up, that virtue is true opinion on how to act right, I guess. And I love it, honestly. I love that definition, because I don't think it's tied down. I don't think we have that knowledge. We may have strong intuitions, but the fact that people strongly differ in these intuitions, and that it changes over time and everything, and that there is, a whole field of moral philosophy with all these theories that in the end don't explain how we should act. I think for me it comes very intuitively that morality and, well, okay, I'm equating it to morality, I guess, but yeah, virtue is really true opinion. I think to some extent you can't really explain exactly to someone why acting in this way is the right way. Otherwise, I mean, a lot of people, like, you could convince a lot of people to act in the right way, and also you would probably always act in the right way. I think there's definitely some, I guess, luck into it.
Well, he says it's granted onto you by the gods.
Yeah.
Which, again, if you want to put it metaphorically, we're kind of back to square one, where some people are born with it, but we can't identify it. But when they become adults,
right,
we just know, okay, well, point to that person. Okay, that a lot of people can agree that that person is virtuous. Do they know how they got there? Nope.
Right. But I think also it doesn't necessarily have to be innate, right? Like, you can not have it, and then if we're sticking to the gods, and then the gods in your adulthood just like bless you for that, even for a period of time, and then you act unvirtuously there. I mean, you can like invoke gods whenever you want, right? If you acted right in this instance, oh yeah, that was God. But if you didn't there, then the gods didn't bless you there.
Yeah, 100%. That's pretty much the conclusion.
Yeah.
Socratic dialogues, the introduction to it says that it's kind of left unanswered, but it's really not, right? And the elimination of two of the most intuitive answers, in a way, is very valuable. But that's the point of every dialogue. But
what does it say is left unanswered? I mean, the definition of virtue is left unanswered.
Probably, yeah, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember like the exact definition of virtue by Socrates? Is it offered somewhere else? Offered?
No, first of all, no, but it would be a little bit out of character. I know that there are some dialogues where he's more confident and he kind of gives pieces of of knowledge. Some of his speeches do describe what something is. I think maybe in the apology he's kind of more confident. He doesn't do the okay, tell me what it is.
He
okay,
doesn't apologize.
Yeah, he's unapologetic. But here again, he confidently says that there's the difference between knowledge and true belief, which is really valuable in this context. Anyway.
Another part that we didn't discuss that I really liked is that Meno at some point, when he's dissuaded, that he realizes that he doesn't know what virtue is, and he sort of describes how Socrates makes him feel. He admits his feelings finally, and probably describes how Socrates makes a lot of people feel. That he's like an eel. He's like an
I guess an electric. Well, not really, but he numbs.
That's not the word that's used. I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah, like energetic splashy fish. Pretty sure is what
pretty sure that's what they say.
I'm pretty sure that's
in Latin.
But yeah, in Latin. But
yeah, so that
he numbs the mind.
Yeah, he numbs them, and he's sort of Meno's lost in a haze of like, I actually don't know. And Socrates is like, yeah, but what if that energetic splashy fish is numb too? I'm numb too. I really don't know. And I guess that's why he gets prosecuted and killed, but he argues that that's a good thing. And he brings it up, as you said, like the slave thing is a metaphor, is a microcosm.
Not really, but
that's not the term, but of his discussion with Meno, is it better for the slave to think that a square with sides 4 is double the size of a square with sides 2? Or is it better for him to be in a haze and motivated to be looking for the right answer to the question instead? And I think that's what Socrates says. That's where Socrates says they are, right? They're in the haze looking for an answer, and that's a good place to be because you're looking, you're striving.
Yeah. So yeah, another use for the whole geometry
microcosm metaphor.
Geometry journey for Meno to, at the beginning of the thing, when they get to the inconsistencies in what he thinks virtue is, he says, "Oh, whatever you say is always so numbing to the mind and the tongue." And then later on, Socrates says, "Okay, well, would you agree that I've kind of numbed the slave to his knowledge of geometry, but that's also a good thing?" Yeah, sure. Okay, so that was useful. Let's end with this little thought. Okay. You know how we always, I think you agree that Eminem in his time was misunderstood, where he said these obviously offensive things that on paper, and if you don't understand the context and the message, are seemingly disruptive to the peace and dangerous and whatever you want to say. But when you appreciate him on a high enough level, you do think that his whole message and mission is to do good in the world. And it's the same thing for Socrates, whether it was in his time or even in our time, although obviously he has less pull nowadays. Where if you appreciated him at a high enough level, and not even that high level, right? You understand the wisdom in what he's saying. But obviously,
it's a lot less obvious with Eminem than with Socrates. But
no, I don't think so. He was hated in the press. Well, what do you mean? Like his good message is much less obvious? I guess it is. But then also at the time of Socrates, if the forces of the state were strong enough to execute him, there must have been a clear ignorance of his good message.
I think you've said this a couple of times though about Eminem. Well, like, what exactly is his good message?
Well, I know there was a phase where he was saying all these outrageous things that shouldn't merit being canceled, but it was when, the cancel culture was rising and maybe he wasn't getting enough attention or being played on the radio, but he had hate for that because what he was trying to say is for, poor children to free themselves from this and feel freer instead of listening to adults. That it was a highly restrictive time and all this stuff like that. I don't know. But like, we can agree that, I don't know, the work of art he's put out has been useful. I just think it's a pattern that repeats itself. And obviously, for every force, there is an opposite and equal force pulling back. So if no one, well, okay, now I'm just using quotes, but if no one hates you, you're not doing anything of meaning. Yeah, I just wanted to, bring up this common pattern that, to achieve anything great, you have to be able to handle the hate.
Yeah. Apart from Mother Teresa.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. So, this is going to be the penultimate episode before our hiatus.
This is the first time we mention it, right?
Yeah, on podcast.
The penultimate episode before a hiatus.
Officially. So this is a mutual decision, but it was motivated by me having to kind of settle into the new life, and I think I think it's going to be useful. I have to pursue something with a singleness of purpose to achieve it.
Yeah.
And I'm saying it like it's a joke, but it's not really a joke.
No, I didn't take it as a joke. It's good things are ahead.
Good things are ahead. I think we'll come back on the other end of this. If we are back for season 3 ever, which, we can't put a date on it, but
yeah,
we'll
come back stronger than ever, wiser than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And our best structured episodes, I think, are the ones where we took the most notes, where we chose the pieces of work that most interested us.
And for the last couple of weeks, we have been flying by the seat of our pants.
Yeah.
And
we've
literally making up the new subject days before the episode.
Yeah, then reading it on the plane, landing, sleeping, and then recording the episode. It's
and it probably affects the quality, but it also, I think, if any problem came up, we would be in trouble. Like, if anything delayed us.
Yeah, if we had a Wi-Fi outing for 8 hours when we had to upload, we wouldn't have any advance.
And I actually don't feel like we've, made bad episodes or talked about texts that we didn't want to talk about or shouldn't have talked about yet, right? I think we would have gotten there.
Yeah,
if we were.
I think there's been one or two things where we said, well, like, that's back in the day, not in our rush period, but back in the day we've said like, oh, okay, why would we read this? But I think if we come back, it's gonna look like, we're gonna choose a book that interests us. We're gonna read it in advance, take all the notes, make a solid 2-parter. Restart the season. We'll be 2 episodes in advance.
And if we do come back, we're gonna have a bank, like we always dreamed of.
And there were periods where we had one, but it's all expired.
We exhausted it pretty quickly.
And anyway,
there's probably things there still.
Yeah, there's the episode 0 and there's the episode on altruism, both of which I would like to keep under
wraps,
under close supervision of.
You'd like to keep those under wraps, but episode 1 is out there.
Episode 1 was on what?
It's not the subject. It's the
audio.
Yeah,
because I'm pretty proud of the subjects of our first 4.
Yeah.
That was cool. But then obviously by the end of season 1, it was dragging, just as we are right now.
Yeah, and we're making it sound like this is the end. We'll talk more, nostalgically in the next episode, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Something else is coming up. Guess what? We don't know the subject yet.
Yeah.
But I think it should be a work about endings or about hiatuses, hiati, something like that. Anyway, thank you for listening. It's been Thinkin Bros. What's our Thinkin Bros copyrighted rating? R
1, 2, 3, 9.
7. Okay.
This is the first time. I think this is the
time.
first time we've reversed it.
Yeah, I think there's. Well, first of all, when I was reading it, I was a little bit out of it.
Okay.
Yesterday, whenever something difficult came up, like his explanation of what color is, I just kind of mentally skipped it.
Shapes.
Hoping,
Color was fine.
Yeah. Shapes.
I just didn't get that at all. Yeah, but
Yeah, but it happened more than once where I was just like, I'm just gonna skip over this because maybe Alex understands, or maybe at least I understand the main structure of the argument.
okay. No, that's fair. That's probably more time restriction than actual, like if you took the time to read. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with an average of 8. Well, thanks a lot for listening again. Go to thinkingbros.com for more information, or contact us at thinkingbros. If there's one thing that hasn't gotten better after 51 episodes,
Contest us.
I'm always trying to say the right thing too. Contact us at thinkingbros@gmail.com. And I've been Chris.
Alex, bye-bye.